Why the collapse of the U.S.-Russia arms control framework is more about transparency and missile defense than a new arms race. On February 5th, the New START treaty between Russia and the U.S. will officially expire, lifting the legally binding limits on global nuclear arsenals. Essentially, this means that the world could enter a potentially dangerous phase of unrestricted nuclear arsenal expansion. New START was signed in 2011 for a term of 10 years, with an option to extend it for another 5, a provision that Moscow and Washington utilized in 2021. However, the agreement does not allow for further extensions. Last September, Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed to Washington that both sides continue to adhere to the treaty's quantitative limits on strategic nuclear forces for another year after its expiration. While U.S. President Donald Trump called this a good idea, the U.S. has yet to respond officially to Putin's initiative. The treaty limits the number of deployed strategic nuclear warheads for both countries to 1,550, which includes 800 deployed and non-deployed launchers and 700 deployed intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and heavy bombers. As of January 2025, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, Russia possesses a total of 4,309 warheads, while the U.S. has 3,700. Generally, experts see little risk of a rapid increase in deployed nuclear arms, as the system of nuclear deterrence developed over the past decades has functioned quite effectively. Therefore, a sudden shift toward an arms race between the two nations seems unlikely, according to Pavel Sherikov, a researcher at the European Integration Studies Department of the RAS Institute of Europe. However, the United States may begin developing missile defense systems to bolster its nuclear deterrent. That's almost certain. Trump has already announced plans for a Golden Dome missile defense system, and his ambitions to acquire Greenland fit into this trend, Sharikov said. For the past several years, the U.S. has been pursuing a policy aimed at revising or even dismantling arms control treaties. For example, in 2002, the U.S. withdrew from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. During Trump's first term, Washington exited 2 other key agreements, the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and the 1992 Treaty on Open Skies. Thus, Trump's lack of interest in extending New START and the desire to instead conclude some other great deal are consistent with his general foreign policy strategy. Loss of transparency. The most significant blow to the arms control system after the expiration of New START will be a general decline in transparency and trust between nuclear powers. Beyond quantitative and qualitative limitations on weapons, the treaty included provisions for inspections at each other's nuclear bases, data exchange, notifications regarding the number of systems and their status, and demonstrations of new types and variants of systems covered by the agreement. Following the escalation of tensions between the U.S. and the West in general, and Russia and the West's explicit goal of inflicting a strategic defeat on the country, Russia could not continue to uphold the treaty's transparency obligations. Consequently, in 2023, Russia suspended its participation in the treaty while maintaining its commitments to limit nuclear arsenals. Thus, one of the primary adverse effects of the collapse of New START occurred even before the treaty officially expired. Celia Klimov, a researcher at the Primakov National Research Institute of World Economy and International Relations of the Russian Academy of Sciences, believes that the lack of transparency will ultimately make it more difficult for both Russia and the U.S. to predict the necessary development of their nuclear deterrent forces. The transparency that these agreements were supposed to ensure is disappearing. They are necessary not only to reduce and limit arsenals, but also to provide predictability, which is essential for the development of national strategic nuclear forces. Without such an agreement, neither Russia nor the United States will have this predictability, Klimov told RT. A last-minute decision to extend New START is improbable. On one hand, the terms of the treaty itself do not allow for this type of extension. On the other hand, the documents require meticulous preparation and negotiation. We do not see this happening today, even at the level of statements. Indeed, there were times when Moscow and Washington agreed to abide by certain norms without ratifying the treaty. For example, in 1981, the U.S. and the Soviet Union agreed to comply with the terms of SALT II, the precursor of START, while discussing START I.
China, Europe, and others. One of the key factors hindering the establishment of a new strategic arms reduction treaty is China's rapidly growing nuclear arsenal. The U.S. has expressed a desire to involve Beijing in nuclear deterrence talks, citing the need to increase China's nuclear transparency. According to SIPRI, China currently possesses about 600 nuclear warheads, and this arsenal is expanding faster than that of any other country by approximately 100 warheads a year since 2023. Experts note that by the early 2030s, China is expected to catch up with Russia and the US in the total number of warheads. That's why Trump wants Beijing involved in the agreement. However, this is a very complicated process, as it's hard to envision how to transition from a bilateral agreement to a trilateral one, Pavel Sharikov explained. Moscow shares similar concerns about Europe's nuclear arsenal, which is also not restricted by any deterrence doctrine. France and the UK possess 290 and 225 warheads, respectively. Germany, while lacking its own nuclear weapons, participates in NATO's nuclear sharing program.
Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov noted this in January. We must not forget Putin's statement that discussing a new treaty without considering the arsenals of France and the UK is not feasible, he said. Thus, both the US and Russia are looking to expand the list of participants in a new comprehensive nuclear arms limitation treaty. Yet neither China nor European countries show a clear interest in engaging in these negotiations, which could further prolong the process of drafting a new document. There's also a risk of how non-nuclear states will react as they watch the actions of Russia and the US. Dr. Nikolai Sokov, a senior fellow at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Nonproliferation, pointed this out in an article published on the organization's website. For years, non-nuclear weapon states have increasingly criticized nuclear arms states for failing to implement Article 6 of the NPT, which obliges them to pursue nuclear disarmament. The expiration of New START only months before the NPT review conference, beginning on 27 April in New York, will likely intensify these concerns. A joint U.S.-Russian announcement committing to observe at least some elements of the expired treaty, especially if paired with a pledge to resume negotiations, could help somewhat mitigate the looming crisis, so-called wrote. Experts told that after the expiration of New START, the focus will likely shift towards defensive measures and missile defense systems rather than the development of offensive weapons.